Before proceeding, I think it's a good idea to practice working with this idea of quote-unquote picking a nice number, a quote-unquote nice number for the class width. All right, let's work with a made-up data set here. So let's say we're working with a data set that has a minimum of 486.34 and a maximum of 691.89, and the apparent discrete unit appears to be 0.01 or 1/100ths. So working to find the span of the range, we subtract the minimum from the maximum and add the discrete unit, and that gives us a value of 205.56. Now, to find the class width, we start with the span of the range, 205.56, and in our case, let's say we want a GFDT that has 12 classes. We divide our span of the range by the number of classes, and we get the value 17.13. So I'd like you to pause and think for a second. 17.13, we want to round this up or down to a quote-unquote nice number. I'd like you to pause the video and reflect on what are one or two possible choices that you might suggest for a nice number. Once you've made your choices, restart the video and we'll talk through the suggestions I would have for a nice number and why I would suggest those numbers would be quote-unquote nice. All right, now that you've returned, I'm going to suggest that 17.13 in and of itself is probably not a nice initial class width to start with. So instead, I would suggest that we would probably want to round this to numbers like 20, rounding it up because it's relatively easy to count by 20s. And we might round down to the numbers 15, which would be relatively close, and 15 is not that particularly onerous to count by. Or we might even round it as low as 10, which would give us far more than 12 classes, but still it's relatively easy to count by tens. Now, some people might suggest that, well, what about rounding to a number like 17 or 18? Well, those numbers are okay, but I'm not certain that it's actually easy to count by those numbers quickly. Counting by 18s or counting by 17s can be a bit challenging. And there are other possibilities. For example, some people might argue that the value 17.5 might be a reasonable number to count by. And there are scenarios where that might be the case, or even maybe 17.2. And depending on the context, it might be the case that you want a number like that. But again, I'm not sure how quote-unquote nice those values are. So my recommendation would be, the top choice I would pick for this would be a class width of 20. And the next options I would pick after that would be 15, which is a little harder to count by, or 10, which would give a few more classes. Okay? I'm not sure how well this aligns with the options you picked, but I hope that my sharing my rationale for why I would pick the numbers proved useful. Thanks very much.